Welcome to Tommy Solo's Famous Friends. This is where I get to chat with people that I've connected with over the years in the world of arts and entertainment, and today I'm happy to have with me original founding member of the band April Wine and new author, Ritchie Henman. Welcome to the show, Ritchie.
Thank you, Tommy. Good to hear from you.
Absolutely, and I should say welcome back. This isn't the first time that we've had a conversation, but you didn't have a book before. So now...
No, I didn't. No, all I had before was a bunch of stories that hadn't been published.
Well, now they are, and the book is High Adventure, Tales of Canadian Rock and Roll Survival. So, yeah, there's a lot in there, and I understand the book is available everywhere. So, in the book, you discuss the early years, including your early love of Buddy Holly. Why don't you tell us about that a little bit?
Well, that's it. That was the sonic boom moment. I call it a sonic boom, that when you hear something that literally makes you stop in your tracks and completely focus on it 100%. And as I describe in the book, my brother and I were, I guess, 7 or 8, something like that, in 1957. And we were in our little bedroom playing. Must have been horrible weather outside because normally we'd be outside every day. But anyway, we always had the radio on. And pop music back then was country, with the exception of, say, Dean Martin and Frank Sinatra and that sort of thing. Most of the pop songs were country songs. But this song came on. The fella gave it a bit of an intro, and talked about this fellow, this new kid from some place called Lubbock, Texas. And that song started with that drum roll and that 3-chord pattern on the Stratocaster. And I know, I can almost see it, David and I just sitting there with our toys in our hand, just staring at nothing and listening to this sound unfold before us. And a freeze frame, it was an absolutely freeze frame. Neither of us moved for the 2 minutes and 50 seconds, however long that song is. And, when it was over, I think we exhaled and said, I don't think we said anything. I think we just sort of mentally went, wow, that's something just changed, It was like a little switch went off inside you. And from then on, we listened to the radio we always had the radio on, but from then on, we were really paying attention and we were listening to everything and looking. I think we were looking for more moments like that. And of course, by and by, they came along, But that was the one that started it. What is that? What is that sound? That's a guitar. That's an electric guitar. I got to do that,
Editor's note, while Buddy Holly did in fact have 3 major hits on the charts in 1957, including That'll Be the Day and Oh Boy, I can tell you from my previous conversations with Ritchie that the song that inspired the freeze frame moment for him and his brother David was, in fact, Peggy Sue. Now back to the show. It's interesting, there's such a glut of really good music out there today, but those were the magic years, and rock and roll was new, and you mentioned the Stratocaster. Nobody knew really what a Stratocaster was as far as kids on the block and so on.
No, we all saw it. I guess we all saw one for the first time when we saw Buddy Holly on the Ed Sullivan Show.
Right.
It was like, okay, that's how that sound is made. You looked at the drummer and the guitar player and okay, this is something. This is a recipe for my life,
Yeah, and there was so much new and interesting stuff happening all at once. I mean, it wasn't long after that we were all introduced to the Beatles,
right.
And before too long, every boy and every girl wanted to get a guitar and a set of drums. And speaking of which, you're mostly known, I think, as the original drummer from the band April Wine. But you, in the early years, switched back and forth between drums, guitar, and bass. So what was up with that?
That was me trying to make up my mind. I think I wanted to play them all, and eventually I did. But I did start with guitar. We took guitar lessons in 1960 when I was 11 and David was 12. And it wasn't long after that I have to say it was probably the song "Wipe It" that might have got me interested in drums, because, of course, all of a sudden here you had a song where the drums were featured. And prior to that, there had been Sandy Nelson with songs like Let There Be Drums. And so I started paying attention. Well, that sounds like fun, too. Maybe I could do that. And I started with knitting needles and cookie tins, making a racket. And I'd switch between that and the guitar. And that led to also an interest in the bass guitar. I started studying all the instruments because we had gotten the album Walk Don't Run by the Ventures came along. And that was kind of another sonic moment, because there was that sweet Fender guitar sound right up front, doing everything. making the song, making the music, and making those feelings that you got when you listen to it. So in the summer of, I guess it was 61 or 62, I'm not sure. My brother was away for the summer working on a farm, and I had that album, and I just played it every day, and I would try and learn all the guitar parts, and then I tried to learn all the bass parts, and I had drums. So by the end of the summer, I was able to play every song on the album on all four instruments, that were featured on that album, which is lead guitar, rhythm guitar, bass, and drums, the essentials of any rock and roll band, even to this day, It was just something I had to do. It was like I was on a mission, that I've got to learn this. If I can learn to play this stuff, maybe I could be a musician, kind of thing. So I just put in the work. I put in the hours and listened and played along with the record and played separately from the record. And then I'd say, no, that sounds wrong. I'll play it along with the record again. Find that note that I got wrong or that change that I got wrong, But it was just an incessant drive to figure that out. I just had to learn that whole album. I'm not sure I could play all those parts today from memory because I've learned, I've played too many other things since then. But
your memory banks are long since full. Yeah, it's interesting. When I talk to artists, and the most successful artists all have a couple of things in common. They have that drive, that spark, and they put in the work.
Yeah. Some guys, it comes natural to them. I may have mentioned this in the last interview. I'm not sure, but Jimmy and Myles, who we started April Wine with, they seem to have a natural instinct for it. It came very quickly to them. And, we were probably a little envious of that. Why doesn't it work that way for us? But it didn't. So we just put in the extra time. We just kept working at it and slogging at it till we got it, And that's the way it is in music with some guys. It just seems to come so natural. Myles, over the next couple of years in April Wine, from 70 to 73, he picked up piano. And, he learned it in no time. Jimmy and I, when we were in the band house, we'd listen to Myles in there practicing. And after 2 or 3 days, we're looking at each other and going, how does he do that? And the same thing happened with flute. And he picked up sax for a while, figured that out. And no training, he didn't pick up any books, how to play flute or how to play piano or anything like that. He would just sit with the instrument and find out what was there and suss it out. But he did have he had that innate talent, and Jimmy did too, to almost the same degree. So that was great. Good for them that they could do that, And as far as David and I, well, like I said, we just had to knuckle down and figure it out.
Well, there's no doubt that Myles Goodwyn is talented, but nobody can tell me that he didn't put in the work in terms of pounding the pavement. That aside, back to you for a minute. Something else that I wasn't really aware of until you sent me your book, which is a very good read, is that you've had a love for cars all along as well.
My parents used to joke that I knew every car on the road when I was 2 years old. And I always countered by saying, no, that's not true. I was more like 3. But, I just, I'm passionate about cars my entire life, and I still am, And, they were always, if I had gotten an opportunity to race, it's very likely I would have taken that actually over music. There was something about, probably because you're by yourself. It's you in the car and the track. Whereas music is a teamwork thing, and racing is a teamwork thing, but in the end, it's the driver out on the track who's either going to stand or fall. So I had that passion for both of them. The music was easier to get to, less expensive, and everything else. And opportunities too. There were just simply more opportunities out in Nova Scotia in the 50s and 60s. All you had was half-mile dirt track racing, for stock cars and eventually drag racing. And I got into that in the summer of 69. We finally got a very professional drag strip, and I raced just about every Sunday out there in the summer of 69 because I had a brand new Chevelle. But cars were the other big passion, cars and music. That was going to be my life, one or the other or both if I could have them,
And we'll be right back after this. Well, it's interesting now that you mention it. Race car driving and being a musician have in common that it's tough to make it in your backyard. You kind of have to run away to the big city to get ahead.
You do.
Yeah.
Yes, you do. Yeah, yeah. You have to go where that field is. We had to leave Halifax. Nowadays, you don't have to leave Halifax to go to make a record. There's great recording studios out there. And of course, these days, you don't even need a recording studio anymore because of the electronic age. But back then, in 1969, if you wanted to be a recording artist, you had to get out of town. Those things only happened in the big cities. And it was pretty much the same with racing. If you were going to go race a car, you needed to go where there was a lot of that going on. And if you grew up in Nova Scotia, you weren't going to find it in your own backyard. So that's the way it was back then.
Yeah, and technology has moved so far ahead. I mean, I remember, I think it was around 1968, that a friend of mine's dad brought home one of those old shoebox tape recorders. And we were just amazed, and then the first thing that I thought was, do I sound like that? So
that's the other big shock, hearing yourself, if you're a singer, hearing yourself for the first time, singing a song, hearing it played back on a recorder, and it doesn't sound anything like you thought your voice sounded like. And that takes some getting used to. But yeah, you talk about the old days, the first tape recorders. We started with a dictaphone. Do you remember a dictaphone?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
My dad had one. They had those where my dad worked. And sometimes he would bring one home on a weekend because he would have letters to prepare for Monday. And he'd just as soon bring the dictaphone home and go off and do his letters. But when he was done with it, we'd say, hey, Dad, can we? Yeah, sure. And he showed us how to use it. David and Jimmy wrote a song and recorded it on the dictaphone so they could listen to it played back, and then they worked on it some more. I wish I could remember the name of it. They even typed up the lyrics on my mother's or dad's typewriter at home. I can see it in my mind, but I just can't think of the title because that was about 65 years ago or something like that.
Right. And we should just explain clearly for younger listeners, a dictaphone was literally a micro tape recorder that someone would dictate notes into to have their secretary transcribe onto paper back in the old days.
That's right. Yeah. They were never intended for music. They were only intended for voice,
Right.
But when you're 13 years old, it's a fantastic toy.
And it was new technology.
And it was, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So we've all had, people from a certain age have all had these discoveries of technology. It was so rudimentary back then, but that was then, this is now. Now, one thing that I found interesting is that even in the early years, when you and David were first starting to play shows, you weren't in the big city, but you both had a sense of business acumen that was kind of rare for bands back in those days.
I think I have to credit our parents with that. I think they were quick to realize that if you're going to do something like this is an organized thing, and there's going to be money. You're going to make money, but you're also going to have to spend money. And if you want better gear and stage clothes and the other things you need to have a business-like approach. And Mom and Dad were the ones that I would say put us on that track. That's, don't forget it's fun, but it's also a business. And there's an old saying, if you look after the nickels and dimes and the dollars will look after themselves. So they taught us right from the get-go how to, okay, if you want more, you want better equipment, you got to get working regularly, and then maybe you can get a small bank loan, to get better equipment. But we're too young for a bank loan, so Mom and Dad said, we'll be your bank, but you have to make those payments every time you play. If the band makes $40, you take half of that and pay off that amplifier or that set of drums or those microphones or whatever it was you needed to constantly. You've got to constantly improve your sound and your look if you're going to be competitive. And that was, I think, the other thing that they taught us. Yeah, if you're going to do it right. If you're only going to do it halfway, we're not going to support you, kind of thing. So we were lucky to have that. A lot of musicians that we knew back then, young guys like us starting out, didn't get that support at home. And you could see how it held them back. So we were the lucky ones. We had parents who understood that this involves talent and there is a potential future for it. So we might as well get behind it and help these kids out and steer them in the right direction. So yeah, we were very fortunate to have that.
Absolutely. I mean, I spent a lot of years as a full-time professional musician, but when we used to practice in my grandmother's basement, quite often there'd be a pounding on the floor from above with a broom,
Yeah.
and my mother yelling down there, "Turn down those damn drums." you know, and then we'd have to, make our way to somebody else's garage or whatever. So it isn't all that common that you have the kind of parental support that you and David did, and it certainly makes a difference, that's for sure, to have that encouragement and support. Now, back at the very beginnings of the band April Wine, and there's a lot more than just April Wine in your book. You have had a long and illustrious career. And at one point in time, you put the band together, and I don't know if it was naivety or if it was audacity that led you guys to go to Montreal with the mission to talk to Donald K. Donald.
I would say a combination of naivety and audacity. We had sent demos to a few people. I can't remember now who, but we had sent demos to DKD because our agent out in Halifax at that point had become a sort of affiliate for DKD. And whenever we went to his office, we'd see all these posters on the wall from these Montreal bands, and they all had that DKD logo on them, and he told us, well, it's Donald K. Donald, the big booking agent, biggest booking agent in Montreal. And so we included them on our mailing list. It just happened they were the only ones that replied. And it wasn't a positive reply, but it wasn't all that negative either. It basically said, send more demos. It didn't say anything like, give it up, boys. go off and be bag boys at the IGA store or something like that, So somehow we found a note of encouragement in there. And we just thought, you know what? Let's just go to Montreal. Also, we had an offer of a place to stay here through a friend of mine. And we didn't know anybody in Toronto we could mooch off of, So we had an offer to mooch off of some people up here. So we thought, well, it's closer than Toronto.
Editor's note: to clarify, by here, Ritchie is referring to the fact that, although they made the trek from Nova Scotia way back then to Montreal, he still lives there today. Now back to the show.
Let's just go to Montreal and we'll just go right down to DKD and knock on their door and say, hey, we're here. Instead of sending more demos, we brought you the whole band, like it, as if they'd be thrilled to see us. But to their credit, they were musician friendly. You know what I mean? They weren't about to say, oh, look, just go back to Halifax and keep sending demos and we'll tell you, and, don't call us, we'll call you. They didn't do that. The attitude was, well, look, as long as you're in town, we'll help you find a place to stay and a place to play so we can at least check you out. So they opened the door.
And we'll be right back after this.
And at that point, the Canadian content ruling was about to come into effect. And people in the industry who were smart about the future, who were looking long term, were quick to pick up on that and see that here's an opportunity knocking. So it was a good combination of our audacity with a little naivety, the CRTC ruling, and the fact that the people at DKD were just great people, just good sports. They weren't about to do anything negative, to cast any negative aspersions on anybody who was a musician. You never know. There could be something there. And sure enough, they were right to stick with us. So that was it, basically. Yeah, we just took a chance. We drove up here. Nobody ever once said, what if it doesn't work? The question never even arose. It was if we drove up here just almost certain in the knowledge that, yeah, we're doing the right thing and it's going to work and we're on our way, and you can't go wrong with a positive attitude anyway. So
I was just going to say, that's the power of positive thinking for you at work, for sure. Now, April Wine wasn't the end of the story. After you and your brother David left the band, somehow you connected with Bob Cigarini, and that ended up with the Dudes getting, wasn't it the biggest advance against sales on record at the time?
Yeah. That was the part of the book that almost stopped me from writing it, because I started this book a long, long time, over 20 years ago. And I got to that part, I was still writing about the April Wine experience, but I was thinking ahead next to Dudes, and I started thinking about things like that. And I said, my God, nobody's going to believe that a kid from this little village at Chester Basin, Nova Scotia, would end up in this band with these two guys from Halifax, two guys from Montreal, and two guys from California, and getting those kind of offers that we were getting from the major American labels. And a lot of the other things, that happened to Dudes, particularly Dudes, even more so than April Wine or Cruiser a little later on. Dudes was just such an incredibly wild 2.5, 3-year ride. And I actually shelved the book for 10 years because I said, nobody's going to believe that. They're going to think it's just a big load of crap that this guy is shoveling to sell a book, But after a while, I said, well, look, it really happened. Why not write it? And let the chips fall where they may. I know it happened, and that's good enough for me, But it also took some time to realize just how weird the Dude's experience was. At the time, it all kind of seemed natural because it was a crazy time. Those were crazy days, So much going on musically, locally, and all around the world in the mid-'70s. Somehow at the time, it was just, oh, wow, great, that's a great offer, Hey, how much did they offer us, and who called, that kind of thing. And then the next day somebody else would call. In no time at all, you got the feeling, well, no, I guess this is how it is with this band. This is how it's going to be, all this weirdness. So it was only with the passing of years that I realized, that kind of thing really was quite unique. And it certainly won't happen again. Nobody getting $500,000 US to sign with a major label back in 1975. I don't know what the modern equivalent of $500,000 is, 40 or 50 years later, what that amounts to. I guess it's probably a couple million.
Editor's note, I did the math, and $500,000 US from 1975 would be equivalent to roughly $2,819,358 US, which would convert to $3,862,520 Canadian dollars today. That is quite the impressive advance, no matter when it was. Now back to the show.
And nobody does that unless you're already a well-established artist. If Bruce Springsteen or Paul Simon was looking for a new record deal, they'd have no trouble getting $1 million or $5 million advance from any major label. But a new band starting out probably won't get an advance at all anymore. Everything's changed now. It doesn't work that way anymore in the industry.
No, that's for sure. Everything is different. Everything has changed.
When I did decide to go back to writing the book after about a 6 or 8 year hiatus, I had to transfer it from a floppy disk. That's how long ago that was.
Oh, no kidding. Wow. It's quite the long process, that's for sure. But that's what life is. It's a long process. And I've been trying to work on my own memoirs for the last few years, and there's just so much. And I don't know how you manage to filter out the chaff and keep it all consistent, but you've done it. It's a good read, and it goes in good order. Yeah, and there's a lot of stories in there to talk about. One thing I was interested in is the fact that you and David have always been very personable, and it seems like, I don't know, you just don't seem to hold any grudges or anything like that. And there was quite the network with the Donald K. Donald group. I mean, Terry Brown and so on. And then there are other people like Linda Moffat, whose brother was Gary Moffat, the guy who replaced David in April Wine. And you ended up working with Linda Moffat and her husband with a cover band for a while. Yeah.
Well, Linda had always been a friend because of our friendship, both with Gary Moffat and with his brother Bruce. Bruce was my first drum tech. Worked with me for about 6 or 8 months, and he was an amazing drummer. And the reason he did that was just he wanted to learn. He wanted to be on stage with us while we were playing. So he worked as my drum tech, and then after he worked for me for about 6 or 8 months, he did the same thing with Graham Lear, which is an even better learning experience, because drumming doesn't get much better than Graham Lear. Graham, for those who, I'm sure in your area, Graham must be known because he's from there. But for those who don't know, Graham played drums originally for Gino Vanelli and went from Gino to Santana and stayed with them for 15 years. and also became a top session drummer. I know he played with Paul Anka.
Yeah, he's still with Paul Anka today, yeah.
Yeah, I forget who all he's recorded with. So Bruce Moffett, did that. So we were always friends with Linda Moffett, and because she was always around the music industry, well, she worked at DKD for a while. I didn't mention that in the book, perhaps I should have, but she had worked at DKD for a while. So when she went out on her own as a booking agent after Donald branched off into promotion, we stayed friends. And then her and her husband, Paul, got into managing this particular cover band called Lyrock. They were one of the top cover bands around Montreal in the last bit of the 70s there. So when they asked me to join that band, it wasn't something I did thinking there would be a future in it, but it came along at a time when I needed work, and I just soon make money playing drums because I want to keep my chops up, keep playing while I'm looking for perhaps another career opportunity. And that's how it worked out. When I went to see them play for the first time, I got to see the guys that were leaving the band, which was why he needed a drummer. And the guys that were leaving the band, one of them was Don Beauchamp. In Lyrock, he would come out front. He played drums in Lyrock, but he would come out front and play keyboards and sing a couple of his own compositions. And it was those songs when I went to see Lyrock play. I'm thinking, wow, it's a good cover band. And then this guy comes out from behind the drums and plays keyboards and sings a couple of original songs. And that, Tommy, was another sonic moment, just like a sonic boom, but probably for me the biggest one yet. When I heard Don get out front and sing Terror in the Street and Incident at New World Theater, both of which are on the first Cruiser album, it was another freeze frame. I won't say moment, it was a freeze frame 10 minutes or whatever, just going, oh my God, what is that? So I joined the band, I went on the road with them, but right away I asked about these guys that were leaving the band, when are they, they're going to start a band to do originals, so, Anyway, folks, you'll have to read the book and see what happens next.
I was just going to say, we'll have to hear the rest of this through reading your book, High Adventure, Tales of Canadian Rock and Roll Survival. I don't want to take up your whole day. We know the book is available everywhere. Thanks so much once again, Ritchie, and until next time, cheers.
Thank you, Tommy. Take care.
Well, there you have it, another fun conversation. Ritchie Henman, like his brother David Henman, is quite a gentleman, I'll tell you that. And I also have a scheduled interview coming up with cousin Jim Henman, so stay tuned for that one. And I highly encourage you to read Ritchie's brand new book release, High Adventure, Tales of Canadian Rock and Roll Survival. It's available wherever you can buy books. Now, here for your listening pleasure from the debut April Wine album featuring Ritchie Henman on drums, here is Fast Train. Enjoy.
I read the callers this morning. I read the callers today. About a man who left from nowhere to be someone, and every day he has to pay in every way.
Tommy Solo's Famous Friends is a one-man production, meaning that I've done all the work, including recording, editing, guest acquisition, etc. The theme song for Tommy Solo's Famous Friends is a clip from my original composition, The Burn. All rights reserved. And hey, if you like the show, why not help us out? Buy me a coffee, subscribe, hit the like button, and until next time, cheers.